Hi, everyone. I'm Elysabeth Alfano. Welcome to the Plant-Based Business Hour. If you only knew what it took to get in the chair today to do this show, I am preparing to leave for Dubai to speak at least 3 times. The invitations to speak keep coming. I'll be speaking at least 3 times in 3 different pavilions at the United Nations Summit on Climate Change, COP28. I'll be speaking with Change Foods, which is organizing an incredible lineup on December 10th in the Global Alliance for Sustainable. Global Alliance for Sustainable Practices Pavilion. I'll be speaking with Amy Christensen of Christensen Global, also doing incredible work. Also on the 10th of December in the Woodwell Climate Pavilion. And then on December 6th, I'll be running my own panel of experts speaking about investing in the public markets for sustainable food systems transformation. In all of my talks, I'll be talking about financing sustainable food systems transformation, the work I do with my fund, as well as what other people are doing in the public markets. And that is with the Food for Climate Pavilion. So a little shaky as I head to the airport in a couple of matter of a day and a few hours. So, but I am in my chair talking today about building out the infrastructure. And as I've always said with VegTech Invest, this is where we really see the growth of the plant-based innovation sector. It's that infrastructure and supply chain. Building that out is not only an opportunity for wealth creation, but it's also really where the industry needs to be if you're ever going to get price parity, up the taste and innovation, down the price. So you really need to build out that infrastructure, that innovation. So how do we do that? Well, Deloitte is on the scene. This was new to me, popped into my inbox, and I thought, well, okay, I absolutely want to have Deloitte on with me on the Plant-Based Business Hour, which brings me to Managing Director of Monitor Deloitte, Mathias Cousin. Can I say Cousin or should I say cousin?
No, that's fantastic. Your French accent is quite amazing.
I lived in Paris.
Oh, you lived in Paris. Nice.
I did. I was in the 15e arrondissement, and then the 6e, and then the 5e, and 7e, and I bounced around quite a bit. So we'll talk Paris later. So for everyone who may not know, as I didn't, your email landed in my inbox kind of as a surprise. Tell me, first of all, Monitor Deloitte. I'm not even sure I'm familiar with that. I just think of Deloitte, the consulting agency. Tell me what you focus on with Monitor Deloitte and how you've decided to focus on food, specifically sustainable food systems transformation.
Yeah, so it's an interesting journey, and so a lot of my work in the market is working with life sciences clients, right, on strategy topics, right, helping them essentially commercialize some of the innovation they bring to market. And for about 8 years, we've been doing a lot of work on what I would call engineered biology, right? These novel therapies that are very transformative, that can, in some cases, cure patients, that, have all sorts of switches built into them that, really deliver, great advantages. And as part of that work, about 5 years ago, we came, as a practice, we came across synthetic biology, and that may sound late, by the standards of the audience, but we came across, incredible innovation related to engineering biology, but applied to other, practically all other types of products that you can think of, whether it's biofuels, biomaterials, etc., and of course food. Food tech was a bit of a natural place to get started in our journey in the field. Why? Because we've seen tremendous amount of innovation in the space, and 2, because it seems that some of the challenges related to commercializing all that innovation are actually not that easy to overcome. Manufacturing is we're going to talk about that, and BioP2P is network is a very interesting organization out of Schmidt Futures that works on that topic. But more broadly, it's the fact that when you're working with cells, and it's the same with life sciences, cells are fickle things, and I'm sorry, I'm not a scientist, so I'm not going to go much deeper than that. But you really need to work through very carefully how you grow those cells, how do you make sure that the system you create goes from bench top, right, to really something that can scale commercially and deliver great products at a price that's commensurate with what you would expect with the products that are already in the market, but also at a taste and consistency that works. Right? And if you think about some of the criticism we've seen of the initial innovations we've seen in plant-based, is that actually they don't taste exactly the same, right? Is it really tuna? Well, it doesn't really taste like tuna, and I know it may sound a little flippant, but that's important. And food is such a personal topic. You really have to have an answer to those questions as an industry in order to be able to scale.
So much to unpack there. And I want to get to tuna in a second, but just to take a step back from the very beginning of what you said, so you're working with these primarily life sciences companies. So if they're working with Deloitte, they're already pretty large, maybe publicly traded, maybe they're not publicly traded, but they're already pretty large. Would you say you're working with the world of Ginkgo Bioworks and this kind of, you're not working with startups, although I see startups in the P2P network. We'll talk about peer-to-peer network in a minute, but primarily you're talking about established companies, maybe even, and I don't know the answer to this, maybe even pharmaceutical companies that are now considering food. Or what kind of companies are we talking about?
We're talking about companies like Ginkgo. We're talking about startups. We're talking about larger established, food manufacturers as well. I think in pharma, we've worked from, let's say Series A all the way to, public markets, commercialization, multiple products, etc. Right? So very broad range of companies. Obviously, we're a reasonably big consulting company, as you know, and so yes, we don't necessarily always work with all the startups we would want to be able to work with. That said, it's I think it's important to have something to offer to them, to help them to be close to some of the issues they're facing as they think about their own commercialization journey, their own scaling journey. And that's where what we've tried to put in place is what we call the Food Tech Industry Working Group. We're bringing a few startups together. Soon more organizations will hopefully also join, also on the larger side. And the idea there is to really talk about some of those challenges, right? Whether it's sustainability, whether it's manufacturing, what are some of the common challenges that we have as an industry, and can we work together to try to address them? So that put simply, right, the sort of rising tide lifts all boats. There are things that for each industry you can work on together without being anti-competitive, just to put it bluntly, right? You need to be careful, but there are things you can do to make sure that you leverage standards, right, when they matter, right? Red lights on cars are not competitive. This is not the point.
Right.
The point is safety, right? You see what I mean? So there are good things like that.
I do. I was recently at a Reuters food transformation conference, and Unilever, I believe, said it best when they said we need collaborative competition. So there's some ground rules, some traffic buffers that we need established to drive on roads, but that doesn't mean we're not still competing against each other, but we have a mutual interest in having good road rules, as you say. So I like that expression of collaborative competition, and I would like to see that happen with the working group. I'll get back to that working group in a second, because I'll be devil's advocate and have a little bit of doubt there. But before I do that, I want to pick up on a comment that you said, it's not that easy to overcome these challenges, which is why we need to work together. And obviously we don't have unending finances. So we need to be smart about how much money we spend. And some of these things we can solve communally with our funds and make it be cheaper. But when I look at, we're talking about huge systems transformation. We're not talking about tweaking the food system. We are talking about dismantling what we have in tandem with creating a new system. You're talking about complete and utter disruption. So I'll give an example. You see some companies like Nestle has been talking about, oh, we're going to feed cows differently and we're going to mitigate methane emission. That just won't do it. That's not going to address land. That's not going to address deforestation, biodiversity loss, water. I mean, it's just not understanding the global issue that we have here. So as we look at large disruption, I think of disrupting vehicles and the cost that it takes to go to electric vehicles, or disrupting energy and the cost it takes to go to alternative energy. And my understanding, and I get this from a study from the Boston Consulting Group, is that disrupting food has a lower cost capital X expenditure than other completely disruptive technologies. So it is an enormous amount of money, but some of this knowledge is already there. So I think of a company like AB InBev, largest fermenter in the world. They're focused on fermenting proteins now as well as beer. So some of the technology, some of the distribution channels, some of the innovation is there. Would you agree?
I think there's definitely a lot that's already there. There's a lot more that's needed. I think, if you look at some of the studies, they'll suggest that actually, huge increases in capacity are needed, in fermentation capacity are needed, right? So I think you still need that. I'll react to something you said, which is, like we really need utter transformation. And I think my fear with something like that, right? And I'm all good, with the concept of transformation and greater sustainability. It's the idea that we're going to put up a lot of barriers in traditional food manufacturers if we go to market saying that, food tech innovation is going to transform everything. And therefore, you won't need cars anymore, right? You won't need this. I think it's, for now, a more realistic, and I'm sorry to challenge you with that word, right?
I'm ready.
You need to actually, almost say, how do we work together, right? How can we as an industry help you achieve some of your, emission reduction targets? Because we can, right? Because our processes are probably, right? And of course, that's the topic of LCAs, but hopefully our industry is going to be a little cleaner, and therefore we should be able to really help you, achieve some of those goals. So I do think.
So I have so many.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm so sorry. Please go ahead.
No, I think so. So that's an important, topic for me, and I think the idea of transformation, right, of utter transformation, especially in food, right, is going to be very, very scary. Right, for a lot of reasons. You spend time in France, you know how powerful the agricultural lobby is in France. It's well known. But it's not just that. There are lots of regulations. I spent time, in Jura on, a couple of years back in a Comté factory. Comté is a cheese that's made, traditionally for many, many years, right? And so I spent time in a very modern facility making that cheese. The regulations, I was like, well, so where do you get the milk? Could we put different types of proteins here? Not really, if you still want to call it Comté, right? And so you have an entire evolution, right, before you're really able to transform. And so working with the existing ecosystem, I think is going to be important to make sure that consumers become confident in their use of those products, start realizing the value of sustainability in food, right? Which today, frankly, I don't think they do, right? Or not enough. And thereby, driving adoption. And then, maybe one day, we'll be able to have, full transformation of the food system.
Okay, so let me respond. Perhaps I maybe misspoke. When I say disruption, I do mean complete and total disruption, but I don't mean doing it without the large players in the market. They're the ones that have the advertising budgets. They're the ones that have the distribution channels. They're the ones that have the global teams that barely feel a recession. I mean, a recession doesn't put them out of business like it would a startup. So I think that they are coming along with us, as are the farmers, whom I believe will do better in this more sustainable system. So when you see JBS investing heavily in cultivated meat, I think, and you see Cargill changing its name from a meat company to a protein company. You see some willingness, if you will, to acknowledge that there are more people to feed on the planet, and we need to do so in a way that is less resource intensive. Ultimately, the mathematical equation to be solved is we need to feed more people more nutritiously in a shorter amount of time, traveling shorter distances, using fewer resources while creating less damage. And if you do that, you get the benefit of a smaller cost of goods sold. You get a more stable and shorter supply chain. We saw what happened during COVID. And you get a more resilient and sustainable supply chain as well, that you get to then promote this to your customers, as well as you get to adhere to the regulations of the state of California, which is now concerned with this, as is the SEC. So I think this disruption happens, but it happens as a partnership, which is will take us to your working group. And I think all will benefit: consumer, government, as it focuses on food insecurity, and industry as it focuses on a better sustainable supply chain. But maybe before we get to the working group, we can talk a little bit about the consumer. You are so right in that you don't want to maybe upset people, too much change too fast. Ultimately, we still have to drive the car while we turn it. We still have to feed people while we make changes. So, you can't do a right angle turn at 120 miles an hour. You have to take that turn kind of slowly at maybe 25 miles an hour. So it's the same as we shift over to more sustainable food. And I'm wondering, consumers love choices. They have, animal factory meat, they have cultivated meat, they have Beyond Meat, they have a mushroom burger. These are all options of burgers. You could, so grass fed, and now they don't have as many choices as they will in the future. And that's just how you frame the conversation. So what are the ways that we can frame the conversation, either to the large food companies so that we work together, or to the consumers, to make this an easy transformation?
That's a really, really tough question. I think at the heart of this is, the product, right? That we're going to put together through all this innovation, all the products rather, right? And it's clearly helping consumers understand, right, the advantages, right, of getting that product and using that product in their daily diet. I think people, and there are lots of research that's published every year on that, right? Why do people buy food, right? It's usually not because of sustainability,
right?
And I think there's a lot of education that's probably needed to make sure that the connection between food and sustainability is clearer, right? But also that people want to do something about it, right? And that's the goal of marketing, really, right? It's really the job of a good marketer is
education.
Go and change behaviors in the market, right? It's education for a new behavior. I think that's the biggest challenge in this industry, because if you think about a new steak, right, made out of cells, it's not fundamentally more healthy than another steak, right? It shouldn't be, right? Maybe it is. I don't know, right? The jury might be out. And the question then is, hopefully it is actually much better for the environment. Okay, so then, but convince me, assuming taste, consistency, chewing, etc., is all taken care of, convince me why I should still go for that if it's not for, if we're at price parity. And so I think you kind of have to educate the consumers or really, really achieve incredible cost efficiencies and really go down that experience curve in a way that makes it, if your steak is twice as cheap, or much more expensive, much cheaper, 50% lower in cost, right? I think you'll probably convince a lot of people much faster. But I don't think we're there yet, right? We still have a bit of a cost disadvantage to work through there. And so sustainability is going to be important to talk about.
So very important. I can already tell that I hope you come back on this show because there is so much that we can talk about. And again, I will say so much to unpack in what you've said. I do see sustainability sort of as the icing on the cake, the thing that makes people say, oh, price and taste are comparable. I'll go with this better option. It's a bonus to me. The work that I do in the capital markets, we invest in publicly traded companies that are focused on food systems transformation, removing animals from the supply chain for efficiency so that we can feed more people. And the work that we've done has been classified, and we don't know anyone else that's been classified this way, as carbon neutral without buying offsets. Now, according to the United Nations, offsets are a Band-Aid that really don't get us anywhere. So we're doing the only work that's been certified carbon neutral without buying offsets, and that's because we invest in so many companies in the public market. It acts as kind of a reflection of the sector. And we're working on getting this messaging out so that people can see just how impactful the entire sector is at not producing emissions and at being carbon neutral without finding any Band-Aids or having to cover them up with credits, these kinds of things. In fact, some of the work that we've done has proven to have a global temperature warming change potential of 1.18 degrees. So well under the 1.5 degrees centigrade of the Paris Accords. And right now we're way off target to even hit 2. So you see the power of our sector, again, this blend of companies that we invest in having a really low carbon global temperature warming potential. So I think the sector, what I'm getting to is the sector has really strong sustainability messaging. And as we come together as a group, we will get to that working group that you're focused on. As you come together in a group and we share these messages and we share these learnings, and I've got all this research that I've already spent money on that I can share with other people, I think the sector looks more and more attractive. Now, at the same time, the analogs look less and less attractive. With fewer water available to animals, a lot of cow herds died. That's going to force the price of beef up. So it's not just that our price comes down, it's that beef is going up. So, we live in, as I say, we are turning the car while we drive it. So meat is also shifting in what it can, I'll casually say, get away with. I don't mean that to be disparaging, but, it no longer can do what it used to do, which is,
or in the
pollute
needs that it can
waterways.
really fulfill, right? It
Yes,
can't
right.
fulfill all the needs. It's becoming more and more a luxury item, right? If you look
Yes.
at, the prime steak is actually very expensive.
Yes.
Very fewer and fewer people can actually afford, some of those cuts, and absolutely. But I think, here's the challenge with that sustainability agreement argument, right? It is obviously in our conversation, right? It's clear, right? There is no problem. I think the challenge with it is, how do I make sure that this helps get food on the table of people and make sure that people change their mind about the way they think about food? That for me is still, I don't think I've seen it yet. Our own internal research suggests that you can price your products a little more expensively if you've got sustainability benefits, but not that much.
Not really, no.
Right? This is not that significant a change, right? So for me, it's still a tough argument to make. It's an argument that you want to make, obviously. But we really need to find a way to make it connect with certain types of customers or consumers, sorry. And so whether it's, specific segments, specific demographics that might be more, or, in specific countries, there might be places where that all works better because, there are other things that play into it for them that might make it, inherently more attractive. And you were talking about Change Foods and Abu Dhabi. I think, there was an announcement maybe a year ago that they were planning to open some sort of factory there, right, to produce casein. And that's, for Abu Dhabi and the UAE, it's also a biosecurity question, and it's a food security question. And so there, yes, sustainability, but also some security concerns that, obviously, will help, pull this through.
I think this messaging is going to get through to people because it's going to be coming from so many different vantage points, but all culminating in the same response. So you have food insecurity, you have food justice. How many people can have a filet mignon? If you're in the United States, maybe many people, but not many people outside the United States. But if you're growing meat from cells, then it's filet mignon for everyone. So, fair access to protein, maybe let me say it that way. National security, being able to feed people in another pandemic, let's say, sustainability, efficiency, natural resource protection and biodiversity. So I think and these all play together. So I think the messaging is going to be hitting people, starting with COP28, kind of dubbed the food COP. I think from governments, from industry, from regulators, from consumers, from Gen Z, it's coming. It's a coming because the system we have no longer can fulfill its job, as we were saying. So let's talk about this working group and what you're really hoping to see transpire. And I'm going to share my screen. I'm sorry for the people listening on audio.
Before I get there, you said something that's really important. Is there's another advantage that we didn't talk about, which is nutrition.
Yes.
And I like what you said. You said fair access to protein. I think it's not just fair access to protein, it's fair access to, high quality nutrition. And and I think this is something that this sector specifically probably can do better than anyone, right? If we really think it through, right? Because we're engineering biology, and obviously the things we produce, we can engineer them to be incredibly nutritive and good. So.
Of course, we focus on planetary health as well as personal health and personal health care costs. So then we're back to the finance of it all. This might help to bring down healthcare costs. And I don't want to get too esoteric, but, if you deforest less, according to the United Nations Environmental Program, our food system is the leading driver of deforestation and biodiversity loss. 41% of the world's tropical deforestation happens because of grazing animals and raising them for food and raising food for them. If you use less agricultural land, then you can reforest and rewild, or who even knows what innovators will do when we have access to more land because we're saving these resources. So we're solving the problem, but we're also opening ourselves up for the possibilities of having more access to water, having more access to land, having more people being fed nutritiously. This makes for a better working force globally. These kinds of things I think are very interesting to think about.
Elysabeth, this is an interesting point, because you obviously, we're using a lot of land for, animal husbandry activities today. Now, if you were to replace all that, right, with, precision fermentation or cell-based, you still have to feed your cells and your bacteria with some agricultural inputs. And so, an open question, and I wonder if you've ever come across data around how much of that landmass you'd be able to truly free, right, versus replace it with another type of extensive or intensive agricultural activity, which does still have its questions as well.
Yes. Right? I love to roll stats off the tip of my tongue. So I'll give you the stats that I know. And then I do hope that you'll come back on this show and we can revisit that question with that already in mind, and perhaps researched both of us on our sides. But a life cycle analysis study from the University of Michigan compared Beyond Meat. So that's not fermented proteins, that's just plant-based, but compared Beyond Meat to a regular burger and found that it used 99% less water, 93% less land, produced 90% fewer greenhouse gas emissions, and used 46% less energy. Then on the health side, it doesn't have animal heme. It doesn't have trimethylene N-oxide. It doesn't have cholesterol. It has some fiber, not a lot. Doesn't have antibiotics, doesn't have hormones, doesn't have salmonella, doesn't have feces, doesn't have pandemic risk. So, is it a carrot? No, but it's got a better health profile, and it's got a better planetary health profile. So those are the stats I know.
Thank you.
Should we talk about the working group? Maybe
we should talk about the working group.
Maybe we should.
So as I mentioned, a little bit in the intro, right? The idea of the working group is when we see an industry that's in the early innings, where scaling the innovation is going to be really difficult. Typically, we see that these types of working groups add a lot of value, or have the potential to add a lot of value. Why? Because they bring together the innovators, some of the more established companies as well, and together industry bodies too, and together they can speak about some of the challenges they face and design solutions to those challenges that they can decide to adopt. And the typical example is standards. And so we've done it in pharma with labeling standards for cell therapies, which were later, approved by the rest of the industry. Obviously, you don't have everybody in those working groups, right? And so I do think there is a tremendous potential for helping an industry. I think it's all about, helping those participants make sure that they get to decide on what to focus on, right? So that's BioP2P. That's going to be a little different, but I think that
no, I'm trying to get to that page. I apologize. There's only one presenter and one back of the house tech person. I am both of those people. So let me see if I can get to this page.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. You got it. You have it. Yeah. So that these are some of the companies, that we've been really fortunate to have on. Change Foods, you mentioned, Liberation Labs, obviously deep in manufacturing, and we think it's an incredibly important challenge. And I'll come back to that. Bunalu, that focuses on fish proteins, right? Yeah. Et cetera. So I should mention them all, and apologies for not doing that. But the idea is always, our role as Deloitte is not to impose an agenda, is not to push companies one way or the other, is to say, look, this is a forum which you guys own, will help you facilitate it. But the reality is we want you to decide on, which issues are worthy of your time and attention, because, as a group, you're facing those issues day in and day out. And you'd like to be able to have better solutions for them.
Yes. Sorry, go ahead. Please go ahead.
No, go for it. I was going to get into some of the questions, we've been addressing with this forum, but, go for it. Please ask.
Just a quick shout out. Almost everyone on this graphic here: Liberation Labs, Perfect Day, Upside Foods, Blue Nalu, Super Meat Motif, Anya Bio, Aleph Farms, Harmony Orbillion, BioRaptor, they've all been on the Plant-Based Business Hour. So they've all talked about some of the issues that now they're sharing perhaps as a group. So please go ahead and listen to those previous episodes. Are you seeing, because one concern I have about a working group like this, Mathias, is I see so many working groups. So we have the Plant-Based Foods Association. We have, there's a fermentation group, I believe, precision fermentation group that's started. There's a cultivated meat group that's started. There's so many associations, and I wonder if they overlap, if it's too many cooks in the kitchen, this kind of thing. Are you seeing that people are actually working well together?
I think, yes, they do. I think some of the groups you mentioned, I think, are very formal industry bodies, right? So, which have a very specific role to play. The idea behind this one was to say, is there something that goes above type of technology, right? So let's not just focus on precision fermentation, because as you said, right, there's the PFA is already doing a great job on that, right? Let's not focus on just cell-based, right? Let's look across at food tech and say, is there here, or let's call it alternative proteins in this case, is there a set of challenges that we face that regardless of the technology platform we're relying on, we need to be able to have better answers to? And so some of those challenges that we started talking about, I'll just mention two. One is sustainability. We started covering some of that in the call, and the other one is scaling manufacturing. And on scaling manufacturing, one thing that is apparent is obviously it's incredibly difficult, as I mentioned, to work with cells, to work with bacteria, right? Scaling it is very, very hard. It takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of scientific knowledge. And you really need to build the right capabilities or have access to the right partners in order to get that done, right? And so that's where organizations like or ecosystems like BioP2P, like Liberation Labs, etc., come into play, because they can bring not just the capacity. Capacity is a problem, but also the scientific expertise that makes sure that you can scale, right? So that's the idea behind, and you can scale economically, obviously. So that's the idea behind, some of the work where we're thinking about doing, in the context of the IWG related to manufacturing.
So now when I think of Liberation Labs, I think of really focusing on manufacturing and then being able to contract out to many of the companies that are in the same sector. And there isn't really this infrastructure available to produce any kind of quantity that would bring down price, which is the definition of scaling. So impossible to scale if you don't have the infrastructure to manufacture at scale. So I love Liberation Labs and what they're doing. Is there any concern that IP might leak to your competitor or this kind of thing?
These are issues that I think other industries have solved, right? The idea of tech transfer, of building real partnerships with between the manufacturing partner and the innovator. Early on in cell and gene therapies, just to talk about how you scale biology, right? We saw a lot of companies investing in their own manufacturing capacity because the argument was not so much about IP, not only about IP, but it was also about the fact that there were no resident expertise in manufacturers, in contract manufacturers, to do the work they wanted to do. What transpired out of that is that, this requires huge investments. It requires significant time for executives to spend and to invest on, right? And so that detracts you from focusing on adoption and getting your innovation in as many mouths as possible, right? And so you really have to think carefully before saying, I'm going to build it myself. If you've got the capital, or if you've got sources of funding that help you do that and that are going to control the amount of disruption that it does to you, I think that's great. Do it, but always be careful about that, right? As a colleague described it to me, it's they just built that fantastic manufacturing plant. They ended up selling it almost right away, and they said, look, this was really an albatross on our neck. We couldn't continue operating with the type of OpEx that was necessary here. We had to give it away.
Yeah. You see that a lot. Beyond Meat pulling back from its large manufacturing, Oatly getting rid of its contracts to take over entire production facilities. It just requires a completely different skill set to run a manufacturing facility than it does to focus on food innovation.
And that's a different, they're at a different stage, in their life
Right.
cycle,
As
right?
well, as
So
well. Yes.
an innovator, right, has to focus on adoption and making sure that the product can scale, right? For Beyond Meat, that's much bigger. You can imagine that for them at that point, it's like, well, we've already got a market, we've got
Right.
revenues, etc. We can be much better by taking it in house. I think that also is is a decision we've seen, and is pretty common, and I think makes a lot of economic sense.
Yes. When you're a more mature business and speaking from the public markets, Beyond Meat is still quite young, but it is much more mature than other companies. I think of, again, Good Catch that, produced its own factory in Ohio. And maybe that was a little bit too much too soon, because it depends on the timing so that you can keep the cash flow right, so that you've got enough production to make it all make sense. Well, it's great that everyone's coming together. When I look at that, and I can bring it up again, when I look at that image, I don't see larger legacy, I'll call them, companies, maybe like AB InBev or other larger companies that might be willing to share facilities or be involved in alternative proteins, the benefit for them being a sustainable product line that can bring in revenues, and yet they've got expertise to share. Are you building out the working group to be beyond the young innovators that you have there?
That's definitely the idea. I think it's by design that we want to start with the startups, because that's where we felt there was the greatest need. But I think success in this type of format requires different stakeholders around the table. And I think beyond the established food companies, I think you could think about grocers, for example, as being important as well. So you would want
Grocers.
to, well, distribution channels are important. They some of the big ones, can actually drive some of the innovation, the success of those innovations. And so I think, when the time is right for the members, I think, bringing them along, I think makes a lot of sense. Could
Are
make a
you
lot of sense.
familiar? Excuse me to interrupt you. Are you familiar with the group Mighty Earth?
I am not. Tell me more about it.
Oh, so Mighty Earth, Glenn Hurwitz and I are going to be on a panel together at COP28, but they're focused on really encouraging groceries stores to have 10% alternative proteins. They're really pushing for that 10% mark. And they're campaigning heavily to basically educate grocers on how that can limit their own carbon footprint and be impactful for their own LCAs and their own disclosures of their scopes 1, 2, and 3. So after COP, it's a little busy, but right now it's busy. But maybe after COP, I can connect you, or we can all have
I'd
further.
love that, and yeah, I'd love that, and I'd love to have him join the working group and talk a little bit about that initiative. I think that would be that could be a great conversations. Yeah.
He is more of a protect nature. He's coming at it from the biodiversity standpoint, not food manufacturing. It just so happens, as we were talking about the sustainability issues and how these arguments are going to be coming from all directions, it just so happens that if you want to protect biodiversity, you're going to have to shift how you create protein. So we can chat about that. But I did bring back up this image of the BioP2P network. So I just want to make sure Deloitte is focusing on the working group, and from there you're partnering with the BioP2P network to expand the resources available to the group. Is this accurate?
Let me say it slightly differently.
Please.
So the BioP2P network, I think, is a super important initiative. I think comes out of Schmidt Futures, and really tries to bring together in one place all sorts of resources on biomanufacturing. And so you've got a career center, you can look for a job there. You've got, like you highlighted it all, a search tool for US manufacturing capacity. You've got all sorts of training programs, etc. And I think they play an incredibly important role, right, in making sure that this type of resource knowledge is available to innovators and others, right? So they've joined and presented, and it was really great to have them at the last meeting of the working groups. You can see some of the details that they have in their work, and I think it's just amazing. I certainly would encourage you. Hopefully, I'm happy to connect you, to invite some of them to talk to you on the show.
Yes, I would love that. But it seems like a wonderful initiative, and as we discussed, really the hurdle in sustainability isn't a hurdle. It's communicating sustainability. But the real actual hurdle is manufacturing. Now that's a real hurdle, and it needs more investment than is currently piling into the sector. You look at how much has gone to alternative energy, and I think we're like less than a tenth of that. The numbers that stick in my head, but I would need to confirm them, is as of 2021, something like 11.4 trillion went into alternative energy, and something like 3 billion government spending, not venture capital, had gone into alternative proteins. And so, it's not going to make itself. We're going to have to fund the innovation and fund the research and fund the manufacturing. So maybe we can talk a little bit about funding and where you see that coming into place.
So I think we're at the end of free money. I think everyone knows that. I think obviously that will have some implications on innovation. My hope, though, is that we'll see that some of those innovations have actually a path to commercial scale, and that those innovators will be able to raise the capital that's needed. Maybe not from the public markets right away, but from at least some investors and maybe grant funding, and in some cases, etc. That and that we'll see that grow. I think our experience is that as we start seeing some commercial successes in the space, I think this is just going to act as an accelerator for the industry. And so what I encourage everyone to watch is, what are some of the first big, really transformative scaled innovations that we see in the space, where the industry can compete price parity or below with great products. I think we're going to be able to hopefully start seeing a transformative effect, if you will, on the level of funding in the space. One thing. Yeah, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. You go.
One thing that's important in here is I think the government's role. We've seen it in life sciences. It's the administration put together those big goals as well, and I think it's the same. I think it's going to be incredibly helpful to have that funding available to spur some additional innovation in biomanufacturing, bring those jobs here, but also make sure that we have, as an industry, the capital to work on reducing the cost of production.
I couldn't agree more, which is why I'm so excited to be going again to COP28, as we see governments around the world spending on R&D and innovation. So Israel, Singapore, Holland, Germany, China, of course, the United States. Although we're not the leaders there, others are doing more. But we're now in the game fully, I believe, looking at Biden's biotechnology and biotechnology manufacturing big goals. Everyone can skip right to page 20 and see how he talks about plant-based innovation, fermented proteins, cultivated meat, and an interest therein. But I'll also say funding isn't always what it seems. And by that, I mean, there's government grants, et cetera. And then people think of raising money. So they think of venture capital. They think of high net worth individuals. They think of large groups like Bezos and Gates and their foundations. But there's also capital just sitting around, I apologize for being a little callous, but at the discretion of large legacy players. I think of Givaudan, which is investing heavily in cultivated meat in Switzerland. That's a capex spending that they, once they are convinced it is in their best interest for shorter supply chains, which means less cost of goods sold, which also means a better sustainability footprint. It's in their best interest to invest in these kind of innovations. You see AB InBev, Givaudan, the companies that we invest in, that are really making these big investments. And it's not fundraising capital, it's not government capital, but it's still investment. And this is where it's so important to work with the legacy players and not have it be us versus them, but use our innovation with their distribution channels to make it come together.
That's right. Fully agreed. And I think the more those players, start seeing the commercial case for those types of investments, the better it is going to be for the industry.
I completely agree. As we wrap up our discussion today, and maybe you'll come back, we had talks of maybe getting into AI and getting into LCAs, but I'll just say there's a great interview on the Plant-Based Business Hour with the Good Food Institute and Fair Farm Animal Investment Risk and Return. They've put together a framework for companies to start thinking about their scopes 1, 2, and 3 so that they can disclose their emissions, know where they're inefficient, make those changes. It's hard to change what you don't know. So these LCAs can be quite helpful there. And I think if we could do a quick summation of AI, it's going to play a more and more important role and a more and more efficiency guaranteeing role as we move into the future. And would you agree with that statement? And are most of the innovators in agreement with that statement?
I think AI is certainly, should help, right? In a couple of ways. It should help design better products. I think that's the hope. I think you can see, Ginkgo and others, making big announcements on that. And we certainly can hope that that is indeed the case. And then I think it can make you much more effective actually at marketing, at some of the internal operations, right, of these companies. So that's typically how I think about AI playing a role. I do still think we're in the world of working with AI, not without, and so we're not necessarily going to see a huge appending of jobs and things like that, at least in the near future. But that's my hope, and hopefully that's what we see.
I would agree with that. My hope too is that AI brings efficiency, and business loves efficiency. So efficiency brings down costs, and it makes usually a better choice for the consumer. It makes it more accessible for them by bringing down the costs and giving them more of what they want. So business rewards efficiency, and it penalizes inefficiency unless that inefficiency is subsidized. So, okay, we'll transition out because you've got a busy day and so do I. We'll transition out to a couple quick exit questions. We've talked about the future a lot here, so I won't ask you your predictions. As I can see, you're working on the working group and hopefully what you're going to be accomplished in the short term, and maybe you will come back and we'll get an update. But on a more personal level, what do you wish you knew 10 years ago that you know now?
How hard it is to actually get innovations to market. I think it's much harder than I thought, certainly. But it's also incredibly rewarding, and so no question that I'm very happy with the last 10 years.
Okay. You have a busy day. Things maybe aren't even going your way. What is the one phrase you tell yourself to get yourself back in the groove?
Usually it's very simple with me. It's things like keep going. But one quote is that I really like is from Julius Caesar by Shakespeare. It's there's a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads unto fortune. It's really about seizing opportunities and doing what is necessary, right, to realize those.
You spoke pretty quickly there. Could you say the phrase again?
There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads unto fortune.
Okay. You are the first person to quote Shakespeare on this show. I will quote Newton, which I think is sort of related to what you originally said. And that is, a body in motion stays in motion. Sort of just keep going, one foot in front of the other. Okay, it's the same day. It maybe isn't going your way, and so you didn't even have time for lunch. What is your go-to snack?
I love Kit Kats and Cheetos.
I'm going to get you plant-based versions of both of those.
Please do.
Yes, I want to thank. In fact, Kit Kat, I think, has come out with a vegan Reese's, a vegan Kit Kat. I believe those are Mars products. Hope I've got that right, and I believe those are quickly coming to market with plant-based options. But I'll keep you posted the next time you come back on this show. Mathias, I want to thank you for all that you do, for making time today, for being so willing to discuss with me, and for finding the energy to be in your seat for a full hour when we're both so busy. So thank you for doing this, and I do hope you'll come back.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Elysabeth. Happy to come back anytime, and have a great time at COP28. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. You stay put. Everybody is on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter. It has been great to be with you, and I will see you from Dubai. Bye, everybody.